There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I am your host, a really, really happy host right now, sitting across the table from me.
Is it because you got so much sleep or because I'm here?
Well, I'm always happy when you're here, Nephi.
Oh, thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
It's probably a lie, but
I'll
take it.
You should take it.
I will.
You should. But I am. I'm happy to see you, and I'm especially happy to see you today because I am looking across the table at you while we are sitting.
This isn't romantic, everyone. Just so
yeah, we should clear that. I was about to say, as we're sitting in a hotel room, but now you hear other laughter. That's good. On the big island of Hawaii, right?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and you have been here for a couple of days already. I just got here.
I'm here doing work, and you know what? And really, we are doing work. So for everybody that thinks that this is exciting, it's just work. And you know what? You know what I'm surprised by? How much Hawaii looks like Idaho.
You have to get out to other parts of the island, my friend.
Because we're on this giant lava flow, just like staring out across this thing, and like if you've been to Craters of the Moon, you should turn on some Hawaiian music. You're kind of in the same place.
Once you've seen one lava flow, you've seen them all, right?
It's neat.
It's really neat.
It'd be cooler if there were an eruption at Craters of the Moon, though.
Yeah, you know what the difference is between the big island of Hawaii, at least the west side of the island, and Idaho right now?
What's that?
It was 86 degrees today on the big island, and I bet you anything it didn't come close to that.
No, and the reality
in Arco, Idaho.
It's super cool here. I got an opportunity to go around to do the loop of the island and look at some other stuff. And, imagine in a 2-hour period when you can go from 180 inches of precip a year to 9 inches of precip a year, you get the idea. The difference in precipitation makes a huge difference in like the different things you can see, the plant life. The animal life is really entertaining.
Well, we're going to talk about the animal life once. We want our guests to be able to jump in on that. But the other fascinating thing about the Big Island, I mean, you're talking about going from, and I haven't really explored it yet, so don't spoil it for me. No spoiler alert.
I'll try not to.
But all the reading I've done, you have this west side of the island that's super arid and dry and sunny all year, and then the east side, like you said, gets. What was it, 120 inches of rain, something like that?
I think it's more.
Maybe more than that.
Maybe.
But then you have a nearly 14,000-foot volcano where you can ski in the winter months, right?
Yeah, it's pretty tall.
You have basically every climactic condition on this island except tundra. As far as climactic zones, right? It's amazing. And you can see it all in a day.
It's amazing just to drive around.
Well, you can't see it all, but you can get to all these different zones in a day.
I could have taken a picture very easily yesterday and told somebody that I was in the plains of Africa or in Australia, and they'd have said, okay, they would have believed it.
Yeah.
Just like, that's just what it looks like. And it's crazy.
And I think
then the same day, I was staring up at something that looks like it's out of the Predator movie.
Right.
Which is
just
one of the great movies of great American movies of all time.
I ain't got time to bleed.
Yeah. Just a classic.
Two former governors.
You're right.
In that movie, and we happen to. It's fitting because
great segue.
It's a perfect segue, right? Because we happen to be here for the Western Governors Association winter meeting, right?
With 12 governors. At least 2 are destined to become movie stars at some point.
I think statistically it probably is the case, right? Yeah. So we're here for that meeting. It's fitting that we're on this particular island because I think it's frequently referred to as the Adventure Island, because of all of the, the mountain biking, four-wheeling, surfing, well, not as much surfing here on this island, I guess, as some of the others, but snorkeling, hiking, backpacking, you name it, they're all of these amazing
it's an outdoor recreation
things to do on this island.
Yes.
And so when you combine those two, it just makes sense that we talk about the outdoor recreation economy with three of
Who better to introduce it than three of the heads of the states who have offices of outdoor recreation. So there are 8 states right now that have offices, is that right? 9 states have offices of outdoor recreation, and we are fortunate today to be joined by you all. I think, does everybody here have a different title? But in going around the room, we have the recreation, the kings and queens of recreation.
I prefer Empress.
Empress? Well, then you start.
The Empress of Montana.
Yeah, the Empress of Montana. Introduce yourself.
I am Rachel VandeVoort, and I'm the director of the Office of Outdoor Recreation for Montana.
And I am Tom Adams, and I am the director for Utah's Office of Outdoor Recreation.
And Domenic Bravo, I'm the administrator for Wyoming's Outdoor Recreation Office and State Parks.
Why aren't you director?
I think they just give me a fancy title. Feels more administrative, has that administrative title. And I also want to just say it's kind of sad that I got to go all the way to Hawaii to see you two fine gentlemen. Just throwing that out there.
Considering we work about a block apart.
Yeah, I'm just throwing that out there. Got to fly many miles to come see you two.
Well, if that's the excuse you need to get here.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
So it's exciting. I mean, I think that what are you guys here to talk about?
Yeah, well, we were invited here by Western Governors Association to come out and speak with all the Western governors and tell them about our offices of outdoor recreation, what we do, and talk about the economic connection for rural communities with outdoor recreation. So
give us a preview of what you're going to talk with governors about tomorrow. Tell us, what are the talking points? Why should people care about outdoor recreation? Why should people care about the offices?
Well, let's back up a little bit.
Let's do.
I want to know, so we have 3 states. You said there are 9. I want to put you on the spot. Can you name the other 6 that have offices?
Washington, Colorado, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, Vermont, Michigan,
North Carolina,
Oregon.
There we
That's
go.
9.
That's it. That's 9.
That's 9.
And there's probably 7 to 8 more that are working on it with task forces or legislation.
So why do you think it's so, based on what you've listed, there's pretty heavy Western influence. I mean, I think you mentioned Vermont and North Carolina, but otherwise it seems to be a pretty heavy Western influence on outdoor recreation. Do you have any?
I think probably the original start would be specifically because of so much public land on the western side of the country. So, a lot of, especially for our office in Wyoming, probably our second biggest theme was access. So access to public lands is a big piece to something that this office works on, and I think that's probably one of the reasons it's a highlight for Western states.
Now, Utah was first, right?
Yeah, Utah's was first, and Dom's right, but I think historically I would add one more piece to it is the outdoor industry has always played a huge role in Utah and continues to grow, and businesses continue to thrive and be there. And I think that's why you're also seeing states like Vermont jump on board, because Vermont also has historically had a lot of great outdoor recreation brands, and they want to keep those brands there and have them kind of have that heritage as well. So,
and so that's what you're talking about and when you're talking brands, you're talking about the different, manufacturers of clothing or equipment, just the industry itself, not the people that are recreating, but the industry that are creating the products for the folks recreating.
Exactly. The manufacturers, Barnes Bullets is a great example in Utah. They're in basically Mona, Utah, which is close to Nephi. Both towns no one knows about really in the grand scheme of America, but that's a huge driver for rural America, and that's something we'll talk about tomorrow too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that kind of groundwork, now, so you're here to talk to the Western governors, which, by the way, I think is awfully exciting that Western governors and the Western Governors Association has taken enough interest in the topic that they want it to be a focal point of their winter meeting when you have the attention of all of the Western governors and all of the attendees from all over the West and the country, frankly, that are here to listen to what you have to say about the outdoor recreation economy and these outdoor recreation programs.
And maybe backing up one more time before we get there. So for all you listeners who aren't familiar with this and haven't been to one of these meetings, here's what it is. So there are different associations, and these are just the groups of governors that get together who have common interests, and one of them that's been very functional over a long period of time is the Western Governors Association. It's made up of 12 states, correct? 19 states.
19 states.
19 states.
So think about it. If you're looking at a map, think about some of the states you wouldn't traditionally associate with the West. You'd think more Midwest probably, but runs the Dakotas. So start with the Dakotas, run down through Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, to Texas, and then everything west. And then it also includes Alaska, Hawaii, and the flagship territories.
Yep. And I apologize. So we have 12 governors here.
There are 12
week.
Governors attending. Right.
So and so these governors will come together, and what they do is they do something very unique in politics, right? Is they try and find consensus in areas where they actually all have common ground, and they can work together to help drive, towards a common goal, and they actually do that. And that's one of the things that's exciting about the Western Governors Association. I think why a lot of governors enjoy it is because you have both Democrats and Republicans who are coming together, identifying areas of opportunity where they see, a need that is, not bipartisan but nonpartisan, when they can get together and try and effectuate something positive that tends to be positive for all those states in the West.
Well, and I think with the states in the West, makes the Western Governors Association so unique, especially when you're dealing with issues like the outdoor recreation economy or wildlife or water or tourism. I mean, it's the issues in the West are very uniquely Western. And so you can really put politics aside and try and do what's best for the West as a whole.
Yeah, one of my
and on these natural resource and recreation and hunting, outdoor economy issues, there is a lot of synergy among states, whether there's a Democrat or a Republican.
That's right.
In the capital, controlling the capital.
You guys are going to hear me say this a lot in the coming months, because it's my new favorite phrase. They move past partisan. So it's a group that finds ways and prioritizes ways to move past past partisanship. And I think it's a critical thing that we need more of today. And these guys, they really embrace that. They give each other high fives and they give each other, respect, regardless of, what party they're from, recognizing that, let's be honest, a Democrat in California probably looks a lot different than somebody with a D next to their name in Montana. So even though you may be from the same party, you have different interests, you have different constituencies that expect different things of you and ask you to represent them adequately. And that's what these guys are trying to do. They're doing their best to represent all of their citizens and represent, the culture within their states and do the right thing for their voters.
Well, and actually the offices of outdoor recreation, so outdoor recreation and the outdoor recreation industry, the outdoor recreation economy, this is really where...
Outdoor Christian or outdoor recreation?
Outdoor recreation industry. So this, it's nonpartisan, right? Like it's a perfect example of that. So you talk about Western Governors Association, they come together. Our offices are located in R states and D states. They're created by R's and D's, whether it was gubernatorial or legislatively. And outdoor recreation is really this space where so many different people from different ways of life really come together and find these common themes. And even our offices, there's actually 8 of us who have signed what we call the Confluence Accords, and it was an opportunity for all of us, even though we work for and represent different states, we all function very differently and do things differently, but on the same level, we all have a lot of real common goals, and so we all join together and figure out how we can work together on a bigger level to support the outdoor recreation industry as well. So it really carries on, this bipartisan feel. Now,
we've done a pretty darn good job of creating an infomercial for WGA here, but I want to move past the infomercial, and get into the substance of why you're here. I think we've sufficiently laid the groundwork at this point, right?
Done.
Perfect.
Well, and I guess I would add, it does a little bit of a bridge between both subjects, as I think one of the other reasons, besides talking about some of the rural areas and how the outdoor recreation economy feeds into rural communities, I think part of the other reason is, like Rachel said, we're different, and there's a few governors out there that are kind of on the fence of creating outdoor recreation offices. So I think we're also here to explain where the commonalities are, but also where the differences are, and how we can fill gaps in states that some of the states where the other governors and their staff may be riding the fence on what an outdoor recreation office is, to look at redundancy issues, look at bureaucratic issues and those types of things. And I think that's one of the other reasons they wanted us here, to be able to kind of talk about some of those things.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to do, I think I was going to approach this in the wrong order. Excuse me, that was the chair.
Whatever. There's no dog in the room. Yeah. That's the only difference.
I think I'm going to approach this backwards, but I wanted to touch on something you were saying, Dominic. So before we talk about I think we probably should talk about how the programs work, how they came into being, but I'm kind of curious because you brought it up. What is the resistance from other states to creating an office before we act? And then we need to really talk about what is the office, but what's the resistance?
Well, I mean, obviously it's anything under the sun. I mean, I think folks are protective of silos in government. I mean, I think that's one of those things. So if you see things that have overlap, whether it's, tourism, business, you name it, you can just name off anything, game and fish, whatever, and you worry that, okay, well, that has hands in outdoor recreation, why do I need an office? And then you start looking at, okay, well, what gaps need to be fed into those pieces, especially as you're trying to build an industry, and especially in rural areas. And that is really where our offices fill that gap and that space that really isn't being touched. And it's not to say that there isn't some synergies with tourism and with, departments of commerce or business councils and those types of things. But I think the concern that comes from either other state agencies in other states that maybe don't have us, or governor staff that may not understand truly what some of the offices are accomplishing, is I think those are where those pieces start coming up as concern, because they just don't have that information. And I think that's one of the reasons we're here, to be able to kind of talk about, here's how we were created, here are the gaps that we fill, and even if there are synergies, it's that rising tide that lifts all boats. It's like, if you're focusing on one part of your mission, but our entire mission, you wake up in the morning and your entire mission is to enhance and expand outdoor recreation in your state, then I think that's where some of that resistance will be elated, because we can present that information while we're here. So that's kind of the goal.
So tell me your why and your how. The why were you created in the first place? And then how were you created?
You want me to jump in, or do you want to start?
I am assuming each state is a little different.
Each state is a little different.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want to
go? Sure. So the Office of Outdoor Recreation in Montana was created by Governor Steve Bullock. And he actually ran for his reelection for his second term on a very public land platform. And
he's the current governor.
He is the current governor, yes.
Democratic governor.
Correct.
Yep.
And so...
future presidential candidate.
I'm not sure. And so, we... in Montana, obviously, the outdoor recreation industry, outdoor recreation in general, right? It's a real way of life in Montana, and a lot of the industry was there. And so the outdoor recreation industry and a lot of the constituency amongst that group have really been asking for this for a really long time. And actually, in my research taking office, I found that, whether it was Old Scorps or Main Street economic projects, the ask for an Office of Outdoor Recreation happened up, 10 or more years ago. It's something that the people in Montana have been really asking for, but it wasn't really articulated, in like this way. And so, that group came to Governor Bullock and said, we really, really want this. And the reason, the office was created is to grow and enhance the outdoor recreation economy, right? And so having the Office of Outdoor Recreation in Montana in the governor's office, so I'm in the governor's office of economic development, is where my office is housed. It's my job to look at everything that the state does, right? Everything through that lens of outdoor recreation. So whether it's Department of Transportation and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks on this issue, or it's Department of Commerce over here and this group over here, right? And so having someone to look through, that lens at everything is really why and how. And so when the governor was reelected, my position was created, and then Montana also created a public land access specialist. So Montana, obviously, access is very important. So recreation, you can't have recreation without access. So we also have one person that just focuses on land and water access, expansion issues, et cetera, there too.
And so just to reiterate this, kind of coming back to the beginning of the conversation, this is, the ask for an Office of Outdoor Recreation is really, it's not really driven by the recreators, it's driven by the industry that wants to see that economy grown.
In Montana, right? It was very much, it was the direct industry. So I define like direct industry the way I do it. I define direct industry as the people who are manufacturing goods, gear, selling that, and the experiences. So guide and outfitter community, right? Those are like the core real industry. And then you have this secondary peripheral industry that, or economy that has service related, all that kind of stuff. But then you also have recreation user groups. You also have the conservation groups, right? We talk about, I always, try and tell everybody, unique to the outdoor recreation industry, you have infrastructure that's unique to our industry, and that's the public land, public water, also private. In Montana, we have a great block management system, and the access to all of that.
Block management.
Block management.
Now you have to explain that.
Yeah, so in Montana, like for hunting season, for example, private landowners in Montana can register their land through Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks administers access programs on their land for hunting. And in Montana, we're lucky to have 8 million acres on average open up to us through hunting season and other seasons for big game, birds, you name it. And so there's a great public-private partnership with opening up access to doing that kind of stuff. So we're pretty lucky in Montana. We've got a lot of stuff.
So what's Utah's story?
Kind of, I'll go back to Dave's original question is kind of, why or what's the resistance? I think people are still figuring out what this industry is, right? OIA came out and said this is an $887 billion industry, and to a lot of people throughout the states and in the nation, we're like, who is this OIA telling us how big the OIA is, right? And that's kind of the resistance. I think it's a bit of the unknown, right? People are figuring out each state what it does and how they kind of integrate. And originally ours started out with industry too. So our Office of Outdoor Recreation, as we know it today, has just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. But the 5 years prior to that, there was an office, a cluster that was just dedicated to manufacturers. And as that office evolved and grew, they realized, hey, this is much more than just industry. We need to talk about the things that the industry also cares about. And we also need to look at it from a health and wellness side. I mean, the mission of our office is to ensure all Utahns can live a healthy, active lifestyle through outdoor recreation. And that just comes back to quality of life, right? And so as things evolved, the OIA met, outdoor industry partners, the manufacturers in Utah met, and the governor's office met, and they said, hey, Governor Herbert, you have somebody representing air quality, you have somebody representing oil and gas, you have all these different people on your advisory committee. How come there's nobody there for outdoor recreation? It was kind of an aha moment. Like, you're right, this is an industry we care about. We're doing it with manufacturers, but it's way greater. And so, long story short, 5 years down the road, here we are. So
and I think Wyoming's built a little bit on potential, so that's the great thing for us. It's not to say that we don't have some amazing outdoor industry manufacturers in Wyoming, everything from Gunworks and Cody, Maven, some of the smaller companies out there, No-So Patches in Jackson. So, I think we have a lot of amazing outdoor recreation companies, but through us, with amazing Governor Mead, was we approached him in our agency along with, there was a forest task force that had one specific recommendation for outdoor recreation and said, Wyoming has a whole bunch of potential, Governor, what do you think? And his first concept was, you need to create a task force. I want to hear what folks around the state have to say about this, and then we'll go from there. And one of the top recommendations that came out of our task force was to recharter our division and look at creating this outdoor recreation office. And so our specific piece is very similar. It's expand and enhance the outdoor recreation industry. And then, of course, that second piece of access is looking across that fabric of our public lands and what access means to both recreators and businesses. So I think that's where we exist.
I guess a way, and you guys can tell me if this is confusing a lot of people when they, think they're like, Office of Outdoor Recreation, what is that? And I say, well, does your state have a Department of Agriculture? Well, yeah, of course it does. Okay, just another segment of our industry, right? Like, yeah. It's a very important part of the economy. In Montana, agriculture is super, super important, right? So is outdoor recreation at $7.1 billion, in spending for us. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. So in Wyoming, I know that this is the case. As Dominic talked about this, Governor Mead really believes. I know from discussions with him in this idea that the best government doesn't get dreamed up in government. It gets brought from the ground up. And so with the task force, I know his concept was to bring together the people who are the recreators in Wyoming. So not just the not just the providers, but also the people who are out there on the ground doing that, and ask them, okay, what do we need to make this better in Wyoming, to make this economy grow, to create businesses and opportunities? What do you need? And so I know that fed into what went on there in Wyoming, Domenic. And I think that, nationally, I think that, you mentioned it with the departments of agriculture. It's a great way to look at it. In the Department of Agriculture, you might have somebody who grows wheat. You might have somebody who's a rancher. In Wyoming, for example, you have somebody who owns a mountain bike shop. You have somebody else who, lives in Sheridan, Wyoming, and likes to ride mountain bikes. You have somebody who, this is an actual case, a guy who bought a bunch of Jeeps and rents Jeeps out, at the gate of Yellowstone National Park. You have somebody who owns or, manages a lodge in the Jackson Hole area. All these pieces, these are all part of the outdoor recreation economy, along with an outfitter, along with a guide who's taking people into the backcountry, along with somebody who's selling hiking boots, at a store in Colorado Springs,
rafting companies, all sorts of things.
Yeah. And in these western states, a lot of the people who are coming to these western states to recreate. So Wyoming's number 2 economic driver is tourism. Well, what are those folks? What does that mean, in the western states? Those are people who are leaving cities and they're coming west to go mountain biking, and they're coming west to go hunting, and they're coming west to go on a rafting trip, and they're coming west to drive through Yellowstone. All these are outdoor recreation related activities, whether you're jumping in a motorhome and driving around, whether you're going snowmobiling, whether you're climbing. This is all part of the same family. So the Outdoor Industry Association of America, as you mentioned it, when you look at that $800 billion economy that they keep talking about, what is that? That economy is huge. It's everything from a guy riding his Harley Davidson to Sturgis to somebody who is, alone in the wilderness. These are all members of the outdoor recreation family, which I think creates a great opportunity, but also something for you guys to think about. Creates a great challenge, right? Which is because I've noticed, even within the hunting community, there's a certain amount of cannibalism that occurs, right? Where everybody wants to look around, and as much as we all like each other, bow hunters sometimes, like a bow hunter is like, rifle hunter. And then in the outdoor economy, what are some of the challenges you face in making room under the tent for everybody and not having everybody who wants to share the same trail, the snowmobiler and the hiker, chew each other off at the knees?
I think the room under the tent is a pretty good phrase to think about, because as I've grown up in Utah and I think about recreation, people just thought it was kind of this God-given right. It was always there. You didn't have to do anything. It's just a trail. And now there's so many people. It needs to be maintained. And just like the Department of Agriculture, you look at the Forest Service. The Forest Service started growing trees and protecting trees. And now they're like, wow, we need to start building trails and building trailheads and building these amenities that people want. And not amenities just for hikers, but for bikers and all these different people and backcountry horsemen and all those folks. So bringing those people together and creating the things that they desire to have in those places is really important, and we wouldn't be successful without it. But it also means we need some more of that financial support to make it happen.
Yeah, and I guess for me, the biggest thing for Wyoming is we have the space, and right now we can do what I call smart growth. The greatest part and opportunity for us, and nothing against my amazing other states in the West, but we don't have to turn ourselves into anything like a Colorado, for instance. We have the ability to plan for growth of any user group, like you mentioned, Nephi, and any other type of obstacle we might face, because we can actually say, here's a space for you snowmobilers, and there may be some shared use. Oh, and hey, cross-country skiers, here's some spaces for you. And it does this thing for especially rural communities to say, hey, what do you want to look like in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? So we can actually build infrastructure and recreation, help them with their businesses and what those look like, and really think about the usership in those communities. And that's what I think is those opportunities in Wyoming.
We talked about this.
I was going to be the guy really quick that pushes back on some of this a little bit. I'm the guy that Nephi is talking about that struggles with the competition, and it's not really on the hunting side. I actually think that it's an easy place for the hunting outdoor economy and the rest of the outdoor recreation economy to have synergy, because frankly, from my perspective as a pretty avid hunter, hunting tends to be in a other outdoor recreation shoulder season, right? You have all your summer recreation, then you have all your skiing and winter recreation, and then you have this sort of peace in the fall that is I kind of view it as a shoulder season. I can get out there, and there aren't a ton of people besides hunters out there recreating during that transition period. Where I am seeing a challenge in Wyoming, and this is where I push back a little bit on the we can plan for our own destiny, is because at least in southern Wyoming, where we butt up against Colorado, the Colorado outdoor recreation economy has grown so large, and so many people are moving to Colorado for those outdoor experiences that there have been articles in newspapers in the Denver paper saying, you want to get away from the crowds, here's where you go. And they point to a southern Wyoming mountain range that I'm not going to name because I don't want more people to go there. But they point to this mountain range. And what I can tell you in my years is I used to be able to go there any weekend, find a place to fish in the summer, find a place to camp. I could camp in a campground. It didn't matter. This summer, I take my daughters up there for a camp out, an annual camp out, and we have to hit 5 different campgrounds before we find a spot. And I like to do dispersed camping, but at this time of year there were fire restrictions, and my kids, it's just a lot easier to have a campground with the facilities and the amenities it have. I had to go to 5 different campgrounds before I finally found one that had a spot available.
It was the 4th of July, granted.
It was not the 4th of July. I am not even joking about this. Well, because I went to these, and what I can tell you is in each parking lot, I counted in each campground, no more than 2 Wyoming plates. Every other one was from Colorado.
You're welcome, Colorado.
So where's Luis when you need him? Exactly.
So the outdoor recreation economy is, in that context, has spread into places where, from my personal standpoint, it impacts my ability to take my kids out to camp, and I have to. It becomes a disincentive to want to travel a distance to camp and not be able to find a place because folks from out of state have come in and are taking over those areas, right? And so there are all these great things and revenue that's generated by the outdoor recreation economy, but does it potentially push people out too?
And Dave, I agree with you. I think the big piece is we haven't existed long enough in the office to even start looking at addressing it. But ultimately,
you should write tickets to people from Colorado.
I need better jurisdiction.
You need law enforcement authority.
He's the only guy here driving a cop car around.
We'll make it. We're going to make it happen. We're going to work on this.
I think everybody, if you don't tax the non-resident like 1,000 times more than you tax the resident, they should all be issued citations and get misdemeanors for camping in Wyoming.
We charge them double if that counts. So
double doesn't count. I want them cited.
If you're from Colorado, I'll give you Dave's license plate number.
I want it to be a minimum of a misdemeanor.
But going to your point, and I think it's something we've talked a little bit with Office of Tourism and some other folks, is again, smart growth means that you disperse crowds across the fabric. I mean, if you're going to go to Glendo State Park, Semino's just a great experience.
Don't send people there either.
Well, I know. Really good fishing.
Stop.
Dave will guide for you.
I am going to run for governor, and I'm going to cut this program if you keep giving away my spot.
Dave will guide for you, and it'll be okay. It'll be fine.
It's a double-edged sword, right? We're talking about. So I always talk about. I very snootily have my favorite sticker on all my Yeti coolers, which was mine first because Dominic's going to steal the saying, and it says, "My life is better than your vacation," and that's how I feel about my life. I live in Montana. It's an amazing place to live.
It's like the 3rd or 4th best state.
It's the best state. I'm so sorry I haven't
It's right
been
behind
there,
Wyoming.
evidently.
It's right behind Wyoming. It's okay.
But so great. We have so many people out doing all of these amazing things and experiencing a lot of what we're talking about is like experience our public lands that we all own, right, and out recreating. But we get frustrated, right, because there are more people and it is coming in and it does kind of affect our experience. And so it can be a real double-edged sword. But what a good problem to have. I mean,
is it
more people, well, but here's where it could be a good problem.
Yeah.
Because we've got more and more and more people recreating. And you brought up earlier, like I you talk about more people and more people taking care of things too, because right now a lot of the fabric of our recreation experience is funded and traditionally has been funded through a lot of hunting dollars and fishing dollars. So I use the example in Montana, and we've got like 170,000 miles of stream, and we have the most amazing stream access laws in the country.
I will give you that. That's one place where Montana is.
There are many other places I'll fill you in on later, but that's one of the crowning glories. And so we have these great stream access laws. Well, I, as a young girl growing up in Montana, I thought that fishing access sites had been there since dinosaurs roamed, right? Like, that's just a part of who you are. That, hell yes, there is going to be a fishing access point everywhere you want to be. And the key point is there that everybody, that's how everybody feels in Montana. Like, yeah, fishing access sites, they're always going to be there. No one thinks about how they got there, why they're there, who takes care of them, who pays for that maintenance, right? And they're fishing access sites. They're not water recreation access points, right? And so you look at all these people that are using and how we're funding things, and it's like, holy cow, we kind of need to figure out how we can all get together and maybe support this a little bit better. So because right now, like Fish and Game, so, like my Fish, Wildlife, and Parks agencies, they really do, they struggle figuring out how to shuffle their budgets around, because right now they are becoming the recreation managers and the people managers. But how are they funded? They're funded through fishing and hunting dollars. They're not funded through rafting tag fees, paddleboarder tag fees, right? That's not a thing. And so there may be opportunities for us to all think about, okay, how can we work together a little bit more to support the taking care of, the maintenance, the creation of helping disperse users, to create more responsible locations for using. So that is a good problem to have, right? There's so many people out there. How can we start? And you talk about how can we bring everybody under the tent? I like the tent. I've been using umbrella, and I'm going to use the tent
is so
now.
much better.
The tent's way cooler, right?
It's bigger too.
Because I was going to say I have pillars of my office. Heck no, I have tent stakes of my office.
That's exactly.
Okay. So and so where there is room under the tent is can we elevate the conversation? Let's elevate the conversation to where we all have these common goals, these common things we want to work on together. Right. Let's elevate it there, and let's work on all that. Because if all of a sudden we've taken care of all of that stuff that we have in common, and we're sitting pretty, and we can just bicker over the little 2% of things that we don't agree on, dang, we're in a good place. But to spend a lot of time bickering over 2% of what we don't agree on, when there's a lot of stuff we could be working on together, that's like lost opportunity there.
One of the critical things.
I think it's a little bit of a catch-22 as well, because I think smart planning and future planning that Domenic mentioned also needs to go hand in hand with smart tourism dollars that are marketing people to go there. And you look at some of these gateway communities, and we all have a major national park in our state that is arguably overrun, depends who you talk to. I mean, they'll tell you, reservation systems are a big topic in Utah right now. And how do you manage the expectations of those rural communities that you truly need to support, the marketing dollars that are funding them, but also not, for the lack of a better term, loving these national parks to death, right? And those they're happening. You can't go to Glacier in the middle of the summer and try to find a campsite, or you can't go to Zion or whatever. It might be, or
Yellowstone.
What's interesting is how closely, before we get into hunting dollars, how closely this parallels some interesting challenges in managing hunting. Yeah. Because in managing hunting, and I'm going to talk this on a future podcast, but you have this really interesting situation where in some states you're managing. Some states it's about managing to utilize the resource, right? And some states it's about managing to just provide an opportunity. And it's a totally different ballgame. So in some states you have like Colorado, for example, or certain units in every state where they're just trying to get maximum number of boots out there on the ground for a very short period of time. The quality of the experience is, it's different. And then on the flip side of the coin, so you may have a unit that where anybody can get a tag anytime and they can hunt for 6 months because the goal there is it's just a different goal. It's a different type of population management, and it's a similar thing in outdoor recreation. In some cases, those front country opportunities, you may be sacrificing one side of the coin in order to benefit the other, so that you can get the new user out there. Whereas in those backcountry opportunities, you may be creating an entirely different experience by necessity to be able to provide the whole spectrum of opportunities. Now, getting off that soapbox, I do want to say one thing that's interesting about being under the tent. Before Dave, I knew you wanted to talk about a little bit about this funding challenge, which is, you said I had a rancher who was a good friend of mine who was working with and talking with some folks from Game and Fish, at the same time from Trout Unlimited. And I think this really encompasses the challenge that we face and that we all have to kind of wrap our heads around in the hunting, shooting sports, outdoor recreation world of sharing the great outdoors. Is that rancher said, you know what, talking with TU, said, I love fish. I love having them here. I'll give up some of my water for fish. I want there to be fish on my place. But don't make it about my life or the fish, because my life is more important than that. And so he was talking about his ranch, and I think it kind of plays into that where he said, my life is more important than your vacation. And that's, I think, what we have to realize as we're utilizing these opportunities in the great outdoors and we're trying to build them. We have to go in there with a great deal of respect for not just the landowners, but the other user groups who have been here first. We're talking about, and maybe they haven't, but we're talking about, everybody needs to remember this term, multiple use lands, where if we try and make it, if I have to choose between, if it comes down to being, me using the land or Domenic using the land, one of us is going to lose. And unfortunately, that can get partisan, it can get ugly, but if we create space for everybody, if we work under realizing that this is a tent we're going to try and get everybody under, and sometimes everybody means outdoor recreation and ranching, or outdoor recreation and, if you don't think that four-wheeling is your friend, well, they are. They're part of that world. And quite frankly, there needs to be room for industry too. And that industry, in some cases, that's going to be an extractive industry. Multiple use lands, if we can find a place for everybody and we can all do our part to leave it better than we found it, we're all going to have more opportunity, and we're going to have less of people trying to chop each other off the knees to keep each other out. So,
well, but to use it, to have multiple use and to leave it better than you found it, takes money, right? It takes money.
It takes some money and commitment.
And Rachel, you were mentioning this concept of, or I can't remember if you were, if it was you, Tom, mentioning this concept of using it to death, using the resource to death.
I hate that.
You hate that term, or you hate?
No, I don't like the term at all.
Why? Because I do like the term, because I think it's apt. But
why?
I
don't like that we're supposedly loving something to death, because a lot of times I think that a lot of the things that people point to are like, we're loving that to death. No, because if we were loving it to death, we'd be supporting it to our maximum ability. We would be taking, a lot of times you look at that, and I don't think necessarily we're giving tools. We're not giving the people that we have asked to steward something the right tools or all the tools that they need to take care of it. So I think once I look at something and they're like, you have done everything you could do to make sure that has, that it has been taken care of, that it has been, all that good stuff.
All right.
Then I'll use it.
Tell you what,
I just don't like
I'll
it.
add it to the dictionary. It's
a perfect example of where you wanted to go.
But I'm going to stick. So I think we'll add it. Now there can be two definitions for loving it to death. But I think the other side of that coin, and the way that it's used frequently, right, is this idea that I love something so much that I'm going to go and I'm going to take my friend and they're going to take their friend, and we just love this place so much that it's having a negative consequence. And I get where you're going. If you want to love it to death, you're going to continue to throw resources at it. You want to throw those resources at it to prevent that degradation.
But I think that your friends.
I think it's a two-sided. I think it's a double definition.
I think you're both right. I'm gonna since I'm sitting between you, I'm gonna mediate this, which is that this is it. This is something that we have faced before as a nation, and guess what,
That's
everybody?
Where I was going to go.
We figured it out.
So that's what I was going to do. I was going to say this loving it to death concept. I'm going to use the definition I was coming with that we were talking about first.
That's a great way to
dislike so much because it works better for my analogy. But we went through. So we're going through a phase now with an expanding population that's where we have technology that's allowing people to get places that they haven't been before in numbers we haven't seen before, causing damage that's difficult to address without funding. We experienced this once before, and if we back up 150 years, we experienced it with the extirpation and near extinction of bison, with the extinction of passenger pigeon, with the massive declines in elk, in mule deer, in white-tailed deer, in turkeys, in black bears, in grizzly bears, in mountain lions, and the list goes on. We had a resource.
I told him not to do the whole list. He wanted the whole list.
We had a resource then that was viewed as limitless, and folks treated it as such, and we saw these resources deplete. And maybe we didn't really love some of these animals to death. We just eviscerated a lot of them. But conceptually, it was
use. I mean, it's
use of a resource to the point that it had been degraded to the point that it couldn't be used anymore, right? And it needed something to bring it back from the brink, and fast forward into the early 20th century, and we developed this North American model of wildlife conservation, which was actually not formally recognized for about another 100 years after that, but this idea of a user pays system. You use the resource, you're going to pay to replenish that resource. Started with license fees, realized that wasn't quite enough because for various political reasons you had legislatures pilfering the pockets of the license agencies, of the game and fish agencies, and taking those license revenues and using them for roads and schools and whatever else, just general government funding. So then moved to the middle of the 20th century, and we developed the Pittman-Robertson Fund, which is the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act, and the Dingell-Johnson Act. I just like saying that.
Dingell-Johnson is the
best. Isn't that the greatest?
It's best.
I could call it the Federal Aid and Sport Fish Restoration Act, but that doesn't
Not
just roll off the tongue.
nearly as fun to say.
Yeah, it does not roll. They could have called it the Johnson-Dingell, or they could have come up with another sponsor. But it's the Dingell-Johnson.
They didn't.
Moving on.
But in any event, so you have these two acts that came in, and the sportsmen and the industries supporting sportsmen stepped up to the table and said, we're willing to pay our share to make sure that this resource is there. And so we have these excise taxes on firearms and fishing equipment and archery and ammunition, right? And that, coupled with the license fee dollars, largely funds wildlife management in this country, and we have a renaissance. We're living in a renaissance of a lot of these species. We have in Wyoming, I think Colorado's the same way. I think Montana's the same way. I don't know about Utah's elk populations, but we're at all-time highs, generally around the West. We're living in the golden age of elk.
Yeah.
And 150 years ago, you never would have seen that coming.
What's interesting about Pittman-Robertson, before we move into talking about what this has to do with today too, is, and also, I think it's important to note that Pittman-Robertson, a lot of people are like, oh, hunters. When Dave talks about that excise tax, 75% of that is coming from people that don't go out and hunt. It's coming from people who...
It also, it does provide money for shooting ranges and things of that nature too.
It does.
So it is. It is a little more expensive. But yeah, that's
a lot of people who are out there putting money into conservation of a resource. Even people that, the analogy to the hiker might be, even somebody who's not putting a boot on the trail, 75% of that money is coming from people who aren't going to put a boot on the trail, but at the same time, that's going towards that resource. So, are we at a crossroads in the outdoor recreation world? Are you in the same boat?
I think there's a big crossroads, because I think we're in the golden age of DWR and managing wildlife. But if you look at all the trends,
DWR,
Department of Wildlife Resources.
There you go. Okay,
it's another techie term.
Acronym.
I'm in government. We speak in acronyms, right?
I'm convinced you have to go if you're going to work in government for any length of time. I haven't seen it, but I believe that all of you had to have gone to some sort of training course on how to speak in just acronyms.
I didn't take the training class. I just threw a fit. I remember sitting after 4 months being in office and sitting at this meeting, and after the 5th acronym in 30 seconds, I was like, "That's it! I'm walking out. If one more person uses an acronym, I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I know, I can't do it."
Well, what I think of what I see, and I saw this at the fishing show at ICAST, I've seen this at the hunting reports, is both populations are aging out. We're selling less tickets. We're selling less licenses. I mean, there's dream hunts, of course, in all of our states, but still, that Pittman Robertson is slowly declining because people are buying less of those things, right? We need to continue that education.
You know what's funny? I'm going to counter you because that's actually not true.
I was going to say the same thing.
What's actually interesting is we are losing hunters, but in terms of Pittman Robertson, because remember, Pittman Robertson, it used to be Pittman Robertson when you looked at those numbers. What if I were to tell you right now that Pittman Robertson, again, 75% of Pittman Robertson dollars, they're not coming from hunters. They're coming from people. If you looked at so right now, 19% of the guns that are sold that are contributing to Pittman Robertson, 19% of them are hunting rifles.
That's like plinkers.
I come from, I should say,
you worked for Kimber.
I worked for Kimber for 8 years.
50% is from handguns. If you look at, and if rifles, and this is something that's interesting, if rifles, if you look at quote unquote modern sporting rifles and traditional rifles, now you've got 40%. And that's because now people are using those in huge numbers in the, for hunting. And so it does tend, now it's balancing back out, but it is interesting to look at that. The decline is in the user base. It's not in the income.
Yeah, there certainly is a decline on the license in most states on the license side, which for state agencies
per capita, right? As far as the U.S. population, the number of tags, are they actually declining? Or
yes,
is it the number
of actual hunters has declined by something like 3 million people in the past 10 years.
It's same with fishing, too.
And fishing as well. So it's not even as a per capita. It's a raw numbers decline, which based on a per capita, obviously it's an even more dramatic differences or population
and
grows.
It's crazy because we talk about this. The opportunities have they've never been better. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a hunter like we all know people like this, right? This table, we're probably sitting around a table with the people who are these people who are now, we used to plan a hunt in Wyoming. Now we can plan a hunt in 5 different states pretty easy by utilizing the assistance of some of our friends at X. We'll just put the company, whatever company it is that's out there that helps us identify what dates we need to put in for which tags and what, the likelihood of it is. And so it's a great time to be a hunter.
You have better friends than I do, Nephi.
I'm only hunting in 3 states this year.
Well, I feel terrible for you, Dave.
You should.
Mine's only 2, so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I do want to backtrack a little, but I guess before you start, we're in a Renaissance age, and talk a little bit more about the hunting and fishing. Going back further, you talk Land and Water Conservation Fund, you talk Rec Trails Program funds. I think those groups now work better than they did back then. So you look at the way all those funding mechanisms that have put in place over the years. I would agree with you. I think it's a time to step up, and I think a lot of the other users are willing to come to the table about where we go with taxing funds.
So I guess we digressed on Pittman Robertson. But maybe getting back to the outdoor rec side. So
But that's what I was going to.
What is the
It was
crossroads?
just an example, right? So, and I always like when we talk about these funding things too, because you brought up Land and Water Conservation Fund. We're talking about licensing and tag fees. Is everybody we're talking about let's bring how can we figure out how to better fund for all recreation users, in a more holistic manner, and a lot of people are constantly searching for this silver bullet, and I feel like it was this crazy awesome woman from, I think she was from Maine or something, and she was talking to everybody, and she's like, I'm tired of everybody looking for the silver bullet. We really need to look for a shotgun shell full of a lot of little BBs, right? Because that's going to be the answer.
And I agree.
I love. I use it. I plagiarize that so much.
Yeah, I always just say we have to, you have to have a lot of arrows in the quiver, right?
Yes.
You can't just hit the target with one arrow.
I prefer shooting.
I like that.
Guns,
well, of course.
So I like the shotgun shell.
Yeah.
But
I like both because I was doing a turkey hunt not too long ago at Keyhole, and I was hunting with my bow and arrow. Had a nice guillotine. It's pretty sweet with my turkey.
I like to talk in terms of I just use an
No,
explosion.
it's a prime example, Nephi, because I kept missing the turkey because you're supposed to hit it in the head. So I kept trying, thinking I was fancy with the guillotine. Instead, I decided to go back to my 12 gauge.
The BB approach that took care of it.
Yeah.
Technology.
I was digressing. It was just,
I want to ask I'm going to ask a pretty pointed question. It might go over like a lead balloon. We'll see. So you mentioned LWCF, right? LWCF is, that's offshore oil revenue, right? I mean, that's not user fees, right? You have we talked about the history of hunting and angling and the user fees, and Pittman Robertson, this idea of we're going to use it, we're going to self-tax, and we're going to help fund this. But we know, and you talked earlier about the Outdoor Industry Association and their efforts to create these offices, to encourage the creation of these offices of outdoor recreation. But one thing we do know is we know that the Outdoor Industry Association, one of the reasons it was created was to actively oppose a self-tax, a similar type of excise tax that would, the quote-unquote backpack tax, to oppose any kind of excise tax that would go towards funding some of these things that they're actively pursuing, states to create offices like yours. They want these offices. They want to enhance outdoor recreation to help their bottom line, drive their economy. But they formed to oppose paying for it. And so I guess I'm asking, I just want to be...
Tom just raised his hand like
he's
ready to he's going to grab this bull by the horns.
I don't even know if
Put it on the ground,
I don't even know if there's a question in there, but is that a conversation that we should be having now? Should we be revisiting the idea of this large outdoor economy, this recreation economy, and all these different users having some skin in the game?
Personally, I'm a huge supporter of it. I think the state of Georgia is kind of on the right path right now.
I was going to say, like, some states are doing this. So we may have seen this at the federal level, but some states are stepping up.
No, I understand that. So, yeah.
So the way I look at it, historically, the outdoor industry came together, and you're right, they were fighting this backpack tax is what they called it. But a lot of manufacturers were worried that the tax was going to be on the manufacturers, not at the register. And if you talk to a lot of brands today and say, hey, what if this tax is not on you as a brand? You're not going to have to raise your prices, but it's going to be that 0.02% at the register. More people are on board, like, okay, I can buy into that. And that's what's happening in Georgia. So Georgia's saying, there's a debate now, so do we want to create a new tax, which is always incredibly hard, or do we want to take from existing taxable revenue? And that's what Georgia's doing. They're saying, hey, we're going to take 80% of sporting goods, 80 or 90%, and all that is going to go, going to go back into conservation.
They just created, effective with a different purpose, but effectively. So Wyoming has the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust account, and which is creates grants to fund different conservation efforts around the state, and that's largely what Georgia just did, with a different purpose.
Yeah.
But they created a trust account through a diversion of tax dollars that were existing tax dollars, not a new tax, a diversion of existing tax, effectively an earmark.
But it's coming from that gear, which I think is really important, right?
Yeah, they identified it as, they did whatever economic study to say here's what's being sold, right, and we're going to divert.
Out of their sales tax.
Out of their sales tax, right? And we're going to divert that into this trust fund that they then can be used to enhance outdoor recreation opportunities and for other things as well.
Yeah. But as a skier and a climber, I'm all for it. Tax me, because I use the trailheads, I use the bathrooms that are there, I use the trails that are there. I mean, there's no reason that hunters have to pay this extra tax to use the same exact trailhead that I'm using.
And I guess that's why I'm going back to what was said earlier, is the environment in which Pittman Roberts, Dingell Johnson, Land and Water Conservation Fund was different, and I think now the users across the spectrum are willing to pay, and that's why we even in Wyoming it was the users that kind of came to us and said, we want the non-motorized permit that kind of crashed and failed on me. But at the end of the day, they're the one that's specifically saying in their reports, it was the mountain bikers and folks that said, we want to pay a user fee that goes into a fund to take care of trails.
What's funny about Pittman Robertson is that, the companies, so Kimber is writing that check. And what's really funny is if you talk to, the listeners of this show are going to be an exception. listeners of other informed groups are going to be an exception, but most people don't have any idea that they are funding wildlife conservation with Pittman Robertson dollars. They don't know what it is. I talked to we had professional shooters on this show who are spending tens of thousands of dollars a year, and I mean literally are pushing thousands of dollars out the door every year for wildlife habitat and conservation, have no idea that they are doing that. And quite frankly, that exists on both sides. There are hunters who don't know that money. I mean, I was talking to a friend of ours, who had no idea that, that 75% number. They're like, what? 75%? I never would have thought that. But that's reality. Yeah. It's both sides that are unaware of that.
Well, they don't know because on the hunter side, it's the industry that pays that tax, then passes it along to the consumer at the checkout.
It is. It's the manufacturers.
I don't go buy a firearm, and there isn't a line item on my receipt that says 11%.
Nope.
For conservation,
Kimber writes that check,
it's the
federal writes that check.
Yep, the manufacturers write that check and then pass along that expense.
And in a way,
the
reason I bring that up is because, you know what, it'd sting for a minute. Pretty soon we'd forget where it was coming from, and we'd just be putting the money into the resource.
Yeah.
So how do you do it? How do you generate the support and the interest? Is that something that you're working on in your states on generating the support from the user groups to
It's tricky.
I don't want to say
the conversations. How do you start those conversations?
How do you start the conversations about how do you pay for it,
and not have it seem self-serving?
Well, those conversations are happening in Montana. We've got a newly formed Trails Coalition that is one of the most diverse, broad groups of user groups that you can even imagine. And I remember the first meeting I went and met them all, and you'd have no idea who was the horse guy except for he had a cowboy hat on. But everybody else, who was motorized, who was not motorized, right? You would have no idea. 3 hours of conversation, you'd have no idea whose special interests they were there for. And they're having those high-level conversations right now in Montana. Like, hey guys, we have way more to lose if we don't work together on some real basic things, and they are exploring opportunities and how can they proactively create funding sources to fund all sorts of different recreation-based stuff in Montana. And so those conversations are already happening.
So how far down the road are they?
They actually, I believe, have a couple bills that they're looking to put forward in the 19 legislature in Montana. Do
you know, or can you say what they are?
I don't have the exact details.
Don't know yet? Yeah.
So we worked on one 2 years ago. We have the Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant, and it was a new tax, which was a really big deal to pass
in Utah.
In Utah, right? A new tax in Utah is a big deal. And what it was is an addition to the transient room tax. So 0.03% gets a kickback to our office of the grant. So for every $100, there's 30 cents that goes back to our office, and we cap at $5 million a year for the next 5 years. So as an example, this year we gave out $4.2 million, kind of being a little conservative because it was our first year collecting the tax. But that $4.2 million goes back to funding outdoor recreation infrastructure projects of all types. We did 19 different activities.
What kind of activities were you doing?
Hunting, fishing, OHV, backcountry skiing.
OHV.
Off-highway vehicle. Yeah, another
acronym. I know what it is. I'm just making sure because some of the listeners might not.
Yeah, no, that's good. But horsemen, there's just...
You should throw in UFO. I think you should.
Wouldn't that be Nevada?
You're right. Sorry, wrong state. Neighbor.
New Mexico. But that 4.2 we funded 58 projects in 23 of 29 counties and leveraged nearly $33 million in total project value. So it goes back to what Rachel and I were talking about earlier, is the federal taxes are really minimal when it comes back to a state. Like, people within the state want to help fund the projects that they know where the money's going. And we've seen that with our grant too.
Do you find that $5 million is enough to make a dent?
It's totally a drop in the bucket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So how do you fill that bucket? That's what I'm getting at.
It's a drop in the bucket, but when you look at I looked at your guys' numbers. So Montana, $30 million. That's how much Montana PR dollars.
Pittman Robertson.
Utah was $21 million. Wyoming is $20 million. And so then that gets matched with it was brilliant the way they put it together, right? So it has to get
so
matched.
Brilliant, yeah.
Now, not many offices have your drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
I'm going to wager that Rachel and Dominic would very much like to have that drop in the bucket to use in their states. But yeah, I mean, it just gives you an idea. I mean, you guys are sitting at your budget is robust compared to some of these offices of outdoor recreation.
Yeah.
But when you look at your cohorts over there in game and fish, which represent a much smaller segment, right? So if you looked at that, I mean, they're the shoulder season that we talked about before, right, Dave? The shoulder season outdoor recreation users. Those guys are sitting on, I mean, would you like to have their budget?
Yeah, right.
No, but I think it's, in some ways, it's comparing apples to oranges, too. On budgets. We're talking about, on the wildlife side, protecting a public trust resource.
I don't think we're talking apples and oranges. I think we're talking about generations. I think we're talking about the baby at the beginning of life. We're talking about the grandfather who's, or the professional who's out there working.
I see what you're saying. I mean, part of it is we have 100 years under our belt in wildlife conservation to build up these different programs to fill the bucket. Which, by the way, on the wildlife side, is still woefully underfunded. We talk about the money coming in from PR to the states.
It's $1 billion a year.
It was $1.1 billion between PR and DJ funds, Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson. I'm like a little kid.
We're perpetually all 12. Let's be honest.
Right, but about $1.1 billion there, and then all the state revenue from license fees, right? I mean, yet they're still, from a wildlife standpoint, still woefully underfunded. So we don't have a full bucket there, and we've been trying to crack that nut for 100 years. And here we are with the outdoor rec economy, and we're looking at this $5 million being a drop in the bucket. How big is this bucket?
Well, and I guess I also want to say before we talk about the drop in the bucket is I mean, I don't see my game and fish folks as not being part of the pillars in which are part of the outdoor recreation component. So they may just be some of the better funded piece, but they're still part of under the tent that we talk about. I mean, the outdoor rec office is still within that gap of also helping our partners in that realm and be successful.
Right, so and there's funding that goes to state parks, right, for state parks and management there.
I think you're just talking about augmenting another piece where game and fish, it's game and fish. And maybe we're looking at, trying to figure out how we can help round out that opportunity. Game and fish is still going to be, their biologists are going to be doing the same things. They're going to be working on habitat. They're going to be working on conservation. They're going to be working to make those opportunities available.
Right, but they're not doing campsites and trail maintenance.
That's not going to be their priority.
And
so this is an interesting, the progression of we're talking right now about the outdoor recreation economy, right? We're talking about billions of dollars, and we're talking, the shift from all of us just this great industry that's grown out of a bunch of us just running around doing all the stuff we love, right? This is a serious segment of our economy, and we're talking about jobs, we're talking about consumer spending, we're talking about taxes, and so we're talking about it in the same apples to apples conversation, that like any other segment of the economy in the U.S. talks about, right? But like going back to talking about the infrastructure that supports that, and when we're talking about this is a huge economic generator, and we always talk about investing in infrastructure, right? We're always talking about, how can we invest more tax dollars we're paying into the system? How can we invest more money into the infrastructure? Okay, so our infrastructure, like we said, we talk about, it's not just the roads that get to the campgrounds, that get to the trailheads, that get to the trails, it's the habitat, right? Literally, the infrastructure for all these, billions of dollars is habitat, fish habitat, wildlife habitat. So part of the broader conversation too, I think, needs to be like, okay, so if we're part of the economy paying money into the system, how are we going to start reinvesting those dollars back into the infrastructure that we want
I think that's a great question.
If we're talking apples to apples, how can we talk about that? How are states reinvesting their tax dollars? How are the feds reinvesting those tax dollars to support this behemoth of an industry?
I'm going to ask a question of all three of you then. Maybe you've seen studies on this or not. I haven't seen it, so I'm just asking a question. But we have an outdoor recreation economy that's approaching $900 billion. According to the Outdoor Industry Association's report from this past year.
We also have Bureau of Economic Analysis,
at the national
2.2% of GDP too.
Right.
So we've got those federal numbers as well.
Right. So, but my question is, when you're talking about reinvestment, so you have here's what what that economy generates, right? Here's what that generates. How much money is flowing in to supporting that economy on the ground? And I'm talking. Have you done an aggregate of like PR, LWCF, your new Utah tax, the Georgia tax, all these different funding sources to see that are contributing to it, to see what percentage of that $900 billion is being reinvested in that? Is that something that you've done?
I think that you have to look at it in two different ways, because the Pittman-Robertson right is all about conservation, and the Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant is all about building new infrastructure. And that's where it's not really apples and oranges. It's like, hey, are you working on conservation and preserving what you have, or are you working on creating new? And we look at it in two ways. Like if you take Zion National Park, for instance, right? It's housed in Washington County, and Zion National Park was the third most visited national park in the nation. It was third to Smoky Mountain, which has a highway going through it, and Grand Canyon, right? And Washington County, by no coincidence, is the fastest growing county in the nation. So you're putting 5 million people into an 8-mile road in Zion National Park. And you're like, where else can we put these people? So we're looking not only to help the federal government maintain trails, because we put $1 million into federal lands this year of state money, which is a tough pill for some people to swallow, but that's our backyard. But we're also looking to build new infrastructure outside the park. Like, hey, you don't have to go wait in a 2-hour line to get in the park.
This is a fascinating issue that is a problem, and I think Utah gets a bum rap. And I don't know that we have time to go through this. This is a really unique problem, because in Wyoming we talked about this, growing that outdoor recreation economy and growing the opportunities. What if I were to tell you that we in Wyoming, if you were to identify the biggest challenge that we have to growing the outdoor recreation economy, what do you think it is?
People thinking that Yellowstone's just in Montana?
That's cold.
Both acres of Montana.
I'm sorry.
Can you,
it's just I can't have a conversation with Domenic without saying that.
Can you edit that portion? Yeah. Edit her whole section out. Just edit.
No, but
Montana was never here.
We can draw a map for her.
I appreciate that. I would appreciate that. Yes, definitely.
It's permitting.
Sorry, back to you.
Permitting's the toughest thing.
When you have a state that has a huge amount of public land, if you have these people in states that are going, hey, you know what we should do? We should take all these people that are in Yellowstone. We should spread them around these other areas. You run into significant challenges. Now, if you had people just rolling through the state all by themselves, well, we don't have a problem, right? They're going to go find their campsite. But as soon as you start saying, you know what we need to do? We need to have new campsites, or we need to have campsite hosts, or we need to have guides, or we need to have outfitters. We need to disperse. As soon as you start saying those things, you're talking about putting recreational pressure on new areas, and guess what you run into? Funding. You run into funding issues, and you also run into bureaucracy issues.
You
run into
issues National Environmental Policy Act.
Where you're, and this review, this actually is I believe that this is the seed of one of the things that people gripe at Utah about. But if you actually get down to it and you see, this again, going back to now the public lands issue, where Utah gets a black eye sometimes. A big reason that Utah gets a black eye is because Utah has so much pressure on the recreational uses in Utah, and this is my opinion, that Utah's land managers and land users have to say, like, well, we think we're smarter than maybe our federal bureaucracies. We want a chance to do it differently, and it creates this very unique dynamic and problem with trying to grow the economy at the same time you're trying. I mean, it's a really challenging issue, and I think it's worth another podcast at some other time, but it's worth people thinking about and realizing that when we talk about growing this outdoor recreation economy, and we talk about utilizing our public lands for outdoor rec, we go back to Dave's problem from the beginning, where we start to see additional pressure, and we have people wanting to come into Montana and experience that wilderness.
Nobody wants that. I'm just kidding. I love Montana. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Don't come.
When most people come in there for the first time, those people need somebody to hold their hand. Yep. And in this world that we're in, this experiential vacation world where the millennials love you millennials, where they're all coming in and they want to take pictures on Facebook and they want to show everybody what they're doing in Montana and how they're hardcore, most of these people are coming in, they're not coming in by themselves for the first time. They need somebody to hold their hand. They need a guide. They need an outfitter. They need somebody at that bike shop to not just sell them a bike, but maybe take them on a bike trip. They need somebody to not just give them the keys to the Jeep, but lead them out there for the first time. And they will incorporate that, but we have to make room for that if we want the outdoor economy to really be an economy.
I don't think it's just millennials, but I think it's baby boomers. I think it's Gen X. They need infrastructure, and they need to park their RV in a nice spot. They need a trailhead. They need a sign. They need a bathroom. If you talk to Forest Service right now, I mean, the places that get the most use have a nice trailhead, have a nice bathroom, have good signs, and they might only hike for a mile off the trail, but they're looking for that kind of guidance.
And now is the part where we go into intertribal warfare, right? Because there's some of us who are like, hey, you know what? I don't want to see an RV any place in Wyoming, because there is that group that's saying in hunting, like I'm a guy who goes into the backcountry to hunt. But there's a group of us who think that if somebody isn't willing to go into the backcountry to hunt, that they shouldn't be part of the club.
But do you do it by e-bike fat tire?
Yeah.
Well,
the realization is if you want people to be involved, whether it is climbing or hunting or whatever else, you have to have the front country. You have to have hunting with a pickup where you drive out there and you get out and you have something close. If you're going to have a backcountry hunter later, because you have to have the introductory drug, you got to get them hooked.
It leads to my back to the question though that I don't know if it ever got. I don't know if I officially asked it or if it never got answered because we went on some tangent. But what does it take to fill the bucket so that you can have the necessary infrastructure to have the opportunities in the front country, but also, some of these front country opportunities people do it because of the habitat. Right, you have to balance it both. Have you started looking at what that number is? What it would take to fill the bucket in your respective states?
Well, I think we don't know all of the parameters in the first place. That's one, but two, I think we have to change the conversation. So it's nice to have conversations like we're having today. I think a lot of the things are the pieces that we're trying to fill those gaps through these offices that we don't know where all those gaps pieces are. And I think the users don't realize it because going back to my previous thing, the reason I said that it was a different environment is a lot of the users outside of probably the shooting sport, hunting and fishing that knew what their kind of gap piece was we have wildlife issues. I think on the outdoor recreation space, whether we're talking about infrastructure that's already damaged or not being kept up or access is an issue, I think just now, I think a lot of those userships are coming to the forefront, and that's part of that. Let's frame this conversation around that and what modality that comes, whether that's a tax on gear or that's users paying a certain fund or that's companies all coming together and saying, hey, we need to create some national trust that puts this into place. I don't know, but I think it's things like this that come to it. So to say that these offices have the answers, no, but are we having the conversations? Heck yeah.
You're leading the conversation.
Absolutely.
Heck yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Dave asked, and here's what it comes down to. How much is it going to take? Dave, where's your wallet? Open up your wallet. Any of you who will like to do these things, and ask yourself what you're willing, because that's the economics of it. Ultimately you say, how big does the bucket have to be? The question is going to become the users. It's going to come to us. What is it worth to us? Because that's the economics of it. At the end of the day, if we want it to be better.
Well, part of it is you have, what the infrastructure costs are going to be, and then they're
going to be whatever anybody would.
No. You have to hear me out. You have to put together a plan.
Did you just no?
I did no you because you interrupted me. You didn't let me finish my thought. You have to put together a plan, right? So you have to say, okay, here's what we know the user groups use, right? And here's how much it's going to take to do that, and then you have to bring folks to the table and say, if you want to do this, you have to pay, and here's how much it's going to take. And so it's just a question of how much. So it's I think you're partially correct, but I think it's not how much am I willing to pay.
The romance is gone out of this across the table conversation.
Yeah, right. It's not how much I'm willing to pay. If it was how much I was willing to pay, we never pay enough. It's convincing people to pay that they need to contribute more.
I think it's both.
It's more.
It's challenging.
It's not as
issue.
much. It's not as much self-reflection as it. It has to be a concerted effort to convince people that it's the right thing to do.
I think you got to hold the one up, but you have to have the other too. You do have to have an assessment of, okay, how much do we think? But we know. Let's look at the national parks. What's the backlog? $4 billion. Right? We have parks, we have budgets, we know these things. Now the question, now that we know how much it costs, is $4 billion.
Right.
We have
There's been an unwillingness
billion,
to spend it.
That's right. There's an unwillingness to find the money because people want to say, like, who's responsible for it? And it's a challenging issue to address.
But right. That's why I say you can't just put it totally on the user, because the user is always going to say, tax me less. Right? Somehow you have to convince the user that...
And I think that's where that issue comes up. I mean, at the end of the day, that's where the fight happens, is it's where the user wants, not in my backyard, not where I want to pay for it. Oh, but I will pay for it if it only goes to my use. I mean, the altruistic piece means that if I'm going to pay into anything, I want it to be able to access, not be the Snowies overrun with folks from Colorado.
I remember I was not going to say the mountain range.
Well, I threw.
Well, no one's going there now, so don't worry.
It's really windy and snowy. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think the biggest thing is you have to find those conversations of, if we don't figure out what we really need for the resources to not reduce the population pieces, because I think it comes down to not just infrastructure, it comes down to even marketing. It means, how are we going to say, and you folks, we should have talked to Denver long ago, don't come here, but this other place in this rural area that's unloved and just as nice, go there. And if they're willing to spend money for a gas tank to this area, they would to the other place. So I think it's more, it comes down to a lot more, and I will agree it needs to be a plan, but there's pieces of this plan that are more than just infrastructure.
Well,
and
I think that's
user
where
fees paying
you guys
funds.
all deserve a ton of credit, because for all the beating of this dead horse that we've done, like around talking about these, I think it's an exciting concept. It's a super cool issue. What you guys are doing is very important. I think those conversations that you're talking about, they're happening because of you. They're happening because of the three of you. They're happening because of your counterparts. They're happening because of your governors, because you guys are having these conversations. I mean, the reason that we are sitting around here in this podcast and having this mental debate about, like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, is because some people had the foresight to take the risk within their states and to say, like, these are priorities within our states.
What came first, the Dingle or the Johnson?
Yes.
I just had to leave it on that note after the seriousness. It was too intense for me. I was like, man, we were getting intense. I do appreciate it, though.
Yeah, that's your mic drop moment.
There you go.
No, but I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say tomorrow.
It's pretty much all this.
Me too.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah. So this has been a good test run.
This was a good test run. All my notes.
But it's a testament to the work that you're doing, that you've been, like we said at the beginning, that you've been invited to come here and talk about these issues with Western governors, right, and talk about the importance of the outdoor recreation economy. And we're going to, we'll watch it closely. We're very interested. I want to figure out how you're going to get these people from Colorado to stop coming to my places while not, really having a negative impact on our outdoor recreation economy. That's my challenge.
I've got a plan now.
You.
I got it. I'm going to solve it. I got this.
If anybody thought that selflessness was part of Dave's character in terms of why he loves the outdoors and like sharing, no, it's not. It's not the case.
It wasn't for Dave. It's for his daughters.
It's for my daughters.
I'm going to fix it for your daughters. I got this. I got you. I got it.
I appreciate that, and it's not about being selfless. Everybody out there listening, I can almost guarantee it, everybody out there listening wants to be able to go to a place and feel like they were the first one to be there.
They want it to be.
Or they want to go to a place and actually be able to use it.
People want to go. People want to go somewhere
there.
And they want to say, "This is my mountain."
Exactly, and that's a beautiful segue.
You are just segueing. Wow.
That's going to be his new nickname. We're just going to call him Segway.
And get him one? Are you going to get him one to ride?
No,
I have one already.
Not. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, use a honey. It's awesome.
You do not.
Yeah, it's got giant wheels.
You're making that
off-road
up.
Segway.
That'd be awesome.
Actually,
wait a second.
I'm
out of here.
taking pre-orders.
Is there a rule against that?
Exactly.
No.
Okay,
we're about to lose this segue if we go down
right.
that.
Yeah.
Anyway, because it was a good segue. We got to wrap this thing up. We got to let you guys get some rest. You got a big day tomorrow. But if you've listened to us before, we always ask our guests one question at the end of this podcast. So you're on the Your Mountain podcast, and we're talking. This is a great one because you're talking about outdoor recreation and all these places that are so important to people. I want to know from each of you, what's your mountain? What's that place that's so meaningful or impactful for you personally?
And you don't have to be that specific, like the range.
But you can
remain nameless.
Actually, the funny part is it would be actually that exact. So no one will remember. You can edit that part out, so we won't say the range. But that one actually has a special place for me because I like to. I go up there probably similar to you. It's everything from hiking to snowmobiling to hunting to try my hand at backpacking after a late day getting off work on a Friday, which everyone knows is not a good idea. Storms roll in on that mountain on Fridays after 3 o'clock, which is why their signs don't go backpacking after 3 o'clock. But I did that with my son a couple of years back, which was a fun experience. So let's just say with all the ones put together, that's my mountain.
I love it. I mean, that's on my list of mountains. I love that place. I imagine when you went backpacking, you had a flashing nightlight all night. Based on my knowledge of where you probably went, those can be intimidating lightning strikes up there.
And a hailstorm.
Oh, I've had an experience up there where I backpacked in, and it was rain, sleet, snow, and hail, and I didn't know what I was taking off of the tent the next morning. And lightning strikes where I'm pretty sure the boom happened before the flash. It was so close. I didn't even know that was possible.
That would be that's my
But
place.
where you get the crack of thunder and then see the flash, like, whoa, physics.
Yeah, we're
something's going on here. But this is bad. I should probably not be here.
And the things they tell you in the books aren't accurate. You don't want to like squat down. You don't want to try to find a low area. We're just like laying down.
You just want to run like hell.
Exactly. We're just hoping for the best.
Just like, please, I'm going to go to sleep, and I just hope I wake up. Yeah.
Look a little bit like New Zealand, just to throw that in there.
Yeah.
Thunder is scared of Domenic Bravo.
Ooh, that makes me feel important. Man.
Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris. This is
Chuck
Chuck Norris. I like it. Yeah, we'll take
Tom, what about you?
Picking one place would be hard. I think right now it's a little bit more of a proverbial mountain. Like I really enjoy going into the rural communities and helping them develop the recreation assets they have and using our grant. It's incredibly rewarding, and I have 3 little kids and all crazy little boys, and I love the idea that I can take them to new recreation places around the state. It's pretty fun.
So you're building a mountain for them.
I'm building a mountain for them. Yeah, lots of little mountains.
Awesome.
Rivers.
Just generally
I am
rivers,
a river rat, and
Uh-huh.
if you put me on a river, that's my element, and that's where I love to be. And I love to fly fish. I love to float. I love to be there with my family.
Do you have a preference of type of river? Like, do you like whitewater, or do you like it?
Well, on behalf of the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic River Act, I do love me some wild and scenic rivers.
Okay.
Yes.
She usually wears a tutu, though.
I have been known to wear a tutu into the
pink one.
wilderness.
So here's a Montana river fact, and I might not be correct on this anymore, but I'm deferring to the expert. Longest undammed river in the United States, in the lower 48 at least.
That no return.
Yeah, isn't it the Yellowstone?
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yellowstone. Yeah. Originates in Wyoming, in Yellowstone National Park.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So our headwater
Montana,
state contributes to that, but my recollection is the Yellowstone River is the longest undammed river in the lower 48.
You're welcome, Montana.
Exactly.
People are welcome to Google that and correct me. Maybe there's a dam on it somewhere that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, Yellowstone's ours too.
It counts. It technically counts.
But
just like the Platte.
There's my Montana river fact for the day.
Fun facts.
Yeah. See, I wasn't able to stump you.
What about the North Platte that flows the wrong direction?
Are you Googling it right now?
Totally. Yeah.
Are you?
Sweet.
Now,
yes, do it.
We're gonna
take your phone off airplane.
We got to
now.
drag this out long enough so we can confirm if that's true or not.
Yeah.
Well,
at some point, I'm pretty sure it's true.
It sounds right. If it's you, Dave, it's probably pretty close.
well, everyone.
I can be convincing at making things up too. right?
When you
really
think about
stay
it,
on
what are there, like 80,000 dams in the United States? Or something ridiculous
you said that so convincingly that I'll believe that you were
I feel like I just
correct.
watched some film on like the 50th anniversary, and they were talking about it's like 30,000 or 50,000 or 80,000.
I just want
That
you
was
all to know.
correct.
Right.
It was
Correct.
correct. It's been confirmed
Winner,
that,
winner.
that is
All
correct.
right.
That is a very long stretch of
And
river
Google
with that one.
is
So
Google is never wrong.
I'd also like to
Here's
note that the
Wikipedia.
first 2 dams ever from the Bureau of Reclamation, Teddy Roosevelt loves these babies, Wyoming.
Yes.
So
That's true.
Buffalo
yeah,
Bill.
Pathfinder and
Pathfinder
Buffalo Bill.
was one of them. Yep.
And as the former water
1904
Dude.
Pathfinder Reservoir. 1904. I did a little bit of water in my
where
day
in
as
the
well.
state is that?
If you were to draw,
It's right next to the
Wyoming
Clarks
is,
Fork.
Wyoming is generally. Which one are you talking about?
Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill or Pathfinder?
Either of them.
So Pathfinder, if you were to draw the state,
Yep,
you
it's
know,
a square.
It's pretty hard to draw, but it's a square. Pathfinder's almost smack dab in the middle of it,
Okay.
and then Buffalo Bill would be up in the northwest corner
By Cody.
by Cody, just before you get to the park, Yellowstone Park.
Thank
Okay.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Is that, do you rafting the river through town? Does that flow out of that?
Out of yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So been there.
There
done
you go.
that.
The
So
Hot
now you know.
Springs
Very
River.
fun.
Yeah,
There
the
now
Hot
you know.
Springs River in that
Okay.
area. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Anyway, so these are. I appreciate you all once again sharing your mountains, coming here and sharing your experiences and your respective roles in your states.
mahalo.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot one thing. I never mentioned that Mike wasn't here.
Yeah, you did.
I didn't.
Nope.
No, I
So
was
you tried to
thinking
call
back, and I'm like, I didn't even
He's
mention.
been here the entire time. Mike,
I didn't even mention
Mike,
that Mike's
exactly.
not here, and I tried to get him to call in, and I'm convinced that the reason he's not calling in to be on the podcast with us is because he's just pissed that Nephi and I are in Hawaii, and he's
Or because it's like
he's not.
3 a.m. back home. I mean, that could be it.
Well, that could be part of it, but I don't think that's the actual
As
reason.
a
I think
matter
it's
of
just-
tradition, we do record these in the middle of the night, no matter where it is.
It's true. We do them late. But I do want to be able to give that shout out to Mike. We are bummed that you're not here. And sorry that we had to do this one without you.
The sound's going to be bad, but we still love you.
Yeah, we do. And so I apologize that it took me until the end of this to say anything. But now that that's covered, I can say with absolute certainty
But this is the end.
that life is about experiences. So go have one.